All right, welcome to the second episode of this already too long series called Kabul'd Together, where we talk about the ever-developing situation in Afghanistan. Kristy Perano and I are your hosts, and we thank you so much for watching tonight. So let's start with let's start with the update from this week. The United States is basically calling it quits, saying we're done.
Yeah, well, as are the other countries that were there evacuating their allies. So there's Canada, France, Germany. I'm not even sure if Australia really did much. The UK, they've all been there for most of the week, and everyone's kind of wrapping up and going home. There was an announcement. There's an announcement by the State Department today, though, that NATO allies and like a bunch of other countries have reached some sort of agreement with the Taliban to allow continued evacuation. So I'm not sure if this is going to be a totally civilian-led effort. I know there's an agreement to let Turkey and Qatar run the airport. So it's probably going to be some sort of private contractors working with those countries' troops to run the airport. And then supposedly these countries have said they will continue to give travel authorization to their nationals and to Afghans who worked with them, and they will continue to be able to leave. So certainly welcome news for hundreds of thousands of left behind and vulnerable Afghans. What remains to be seen is how well, the Taliban has supposedly come to this agreement. They haven't exactly been keeping their other agreements. So it does remain to be seen how many people are still going to be able to get out. Some of us that have been dealing with what the Taliban does for the last several years are still concerned about, whether, like, how effective this continuation will be.
And you're convinced that the Taliban is going to honor their word, that they're not going to do like what happened on Thursday and just let troops get attacked? Because we know how well the Taliban is good at keeping their word.
I'm absolutely not convinced of that. They may, because Turkey and Qatar are kind of like friendly with the Taliban. They may be less inclined to attack them than they would be to attack U.S. troops. And obviously the Taliban claims that it was actually ISIS who attacked the U.S. troops. But the Taliban is supposed to be the one providing the security. So it's like, well, if the Taliban was actually trying to help fight ISIS, why did they go into Bagram prison and release thousands of ISIS fighters? And then why did they let an ISIS suicide bomber through multiple layers of Taliban security when obviously his name was not on any evacuation list? So I think that raises serious questions about how serious the Taliban is. And then the U.S. did a retaliatory airstrike the next day supposedly in retaliation for that, and they said they killed a couple high-level people, but they have not released their names. So there's some question about, like, who did they actually kill or think they killed, and did they really get who they supposedly were targeting? And then just a few hours ago, the U.S. Shot a car in Kabul, and they said that this was a car bomb and they had disseminated, but then the local news is saying it was actually an Afghan interpreter and his family that were driving the car. So I think that raises real questions, like, did the Taliban give fake intel to the US or something and be like, here, shoot this car? And then so the US shoots it thinking it's ISIS, and then they say, oh, joke's on you, you just shot one of your own people. I don't know. It's really just,
what a week for me to get sick.
Yeah. There is so much information and disinformation and misinformation. And it's really impossible to keep up. And it's not just the Taliban and social media that is promoting misinformation. Also, sometimes it's the U.S. government that is intentionally double counting people or inflating numbers or things like that. Like, they like to tout that, oh, we evacuated 115,000 people or whatever. Well, about a third of those were not even part of the U.S. evacuation effort. It's like Canada got 8,000 some odd people, some citizens and some Afghans who worked for them. And that was counted, and the US also counted those. So they said, oh, we evacuated 115,000 people. Well, 8,000 of those are the ones that went on Canadian planes to Canada. And of course, passed through an airport that the US was securing. And so then they decided they could take credit for that. And the same with Britain and France and Germany. All of them got several thousand people out, and then the U.S. like added that to their totals to make it look like they were doing more. So yeah, there's a lot of it's really hard to keep up with what's going on, because also the governments like to paint a rosier picture of like, hey, this is a nice orderly process and our citizens are getting on planes and getting out of there, and in practice it's absolute chaos. And that's everybody's going to tell you is absolute chaos. I know of a handful of people who did get out, who needed to get out, but my estimate is about 90% of U.S. military interpreters and special immigrant visa applicants have been left behind, which is extremely frustrating for those of us who advocate for them, because that was the whole reason that evacuation was even talked about, was to save SIVs. And then, I mean, it ended up becoming clear that there were more people. Once Afghanistan actually collapsed, then it was clear that, okay, there's more people than just the military interpreters that should be evacuated, but they were always given last priority. And, we kept, those of us that have been advocating for them kept thinking, well, but tomorrow, it'll be their turn, but that their turn never came. And then finally it's like, oh, well, now it's getting a little rough out here. We're out of here. And I am really grateful for this potential extension through NATO. It kind of remains to be seen how well that works, and I don't really trust.
It's good, because I was worried, because I think the worry was that, at the rate we're evacuating people like American citizens and Afghan interpreters are certainly going to be left behind.
Yeah, there's at least several hundred American citizens. So originally the estimates were 10,000 to 15,000 American citizens. Then they did evacuate about 5,400, and then they said, oh, now we still have 600 left. So then the question is, how did we go from 10 to 15,000 to, oh, we got 5,400 out and there's 600 left? That's kind of a question. Did they just really overestimate at the beginning, or are there some that they just can't get in contact with, so they just assume that they don't exist anymore? The State Department doesn't actually force Americans to register to go to Afghanistan, apparently, so they may not know exactly who all is there. But yeah, definitely. And then I think within the last 24 hours, they claim to have gotten another 300 of the remaining 600 out. So they are making progress on that, but it's almost guaranteed that there are American citizens that are going to be left behind in this. And I haven't even seen data on green card holders. They're not even trying to say how many green card holders, probably because it's not looking very good. Like if you can say, oh, look, we got 95% of our citizens out, but only half the green card holders. I mean, that, that's not so. And I haven't even seen the State Department attempt to say how many green card holders were there and how many are still there. And the State Department doesn't really want to talk about how many SIV applicants they left behind, because it's about 90%. So they said, oh,
the administration doesn't. Oh, okay, sorry, go ahead.
Well, they're saying that of the Afghans that have come to the U.S. and been processed already, 7,000 were SIVs. But I don't know. I don't even know what that. So there's 100-some thousand odd people that have been evacuated, and then, as I said, like maybe 30 or 40,000 were not the U.S.'s responsibility. They were other countries' evacuees. And so then, if you assume it's like 70 or 80,000 that were the U.S. that the U.S. evacuated, then there's going to be American citizens and green card holders and probably some family members of those, which is at least a few thousand. And so you may have like 50,000, you may have 40 to 50,000 Afghans that were like not in conjunction with a green card holder or a special immigrant visa. And then of those, about 7,000 are SAVs, but the other, 80 or 90% are others. And in some cases, they may really be in danger. And some of them are like affiliated with some sort of a U.S. institution, like some overseas employees of a U.S. company who is able to get them on the State Department list. Some of them are random Afghans or even Pakistanis who paid Eric Prince $6,500 a piece to get on a flight. That was going on all week. I had sources saying, yeah, if you pay $5,000, you can get on with no documents. If you have some documents, you can get on for $2,000. I kept hearing that from people all week. And then Eric Prince's group, like the former Blackwater company, they actually just said, yeah, we have charter flights. If you pay us $6,500, we can evacuate you. But then some of those people were going on military flights, not just charter flights. So it was
Yeah, no, it's
It was,
starting to sound like though that. Sorry, I'm sorry for interrupting you. I just wanted to keep this moving. Um,
yeah.
but it sounds like at least I just had a tweet in my feed right here that says that hours before Kabul fell, the situation in Afghanistan became so perilous that Secretary of State Anthony Blinken had to return from the Hamptons. So the administration, I feel like you talked about how the State Department doesn't want to answer questions. It sounds like the administration doesn't want to answer questions in general. Like Biden has not been taking questions these days, and
Yeah.
and
Especially about Afghanistan.
especially about Afghanistan. Like, I mean, even though the administration, I feel like, has been moving on some things. Like, for example, they just nationalized several 18 different airplanes to be able to bring people out. Did that not go over well?
I think that may have been from like having them go from Qatar or Kuwait to other bases. Yeah, I think they started like the military focused on flights from Kabul to Qatar, and then they like had some private flights from Qatar to Germany and Kuwait and other processing centers.
Right.
So yeah, there was one point where it got stalled out because too many people had accumulated in Qatar, and then they had to stop evacuating for a while, like a couple days in. But they did seem to get that bottleneck fixed, and like got a network of other places to take people to. I think more of the issues were at the Kabul airport, and they had planes leaving half empty because of so much chaos and like not, which was kind of insane because they had so many people there with documents who were supposed to be able to travel, but it's like you're not the highest priority, so we're not going to let you on the plane. But then the highest priority people were like stuck somewhere else and not there. So yeah, I think there was a lot of mismanagement and probably a lot of corruption as well, and how that all went down.
Before I ask, talk about more about the administration's response, is there any information you want to give that I cut you off from saying that I think is important? Because I know I've been interrupting you a lot.
Not really that I can think of per se. I think what has me the most bothered about this is that they have been completely opaque in like who they are taking, and as I said, they've kind of inflated the numbers by double counting people. But like we're not being told who are this 80% of Afghan refugees that are not SIVs. Like, how did they determine that those people were more deserving than combat interpreters to be evacuated from Afghanistan? And if they really were, then why aren't we being told anything about who these people are? And I would also say that there are now people have started up saying, oh, look at all these unvetted Afghan refugees. It does remain to be seen how much vetting is done before they're released, but the current situation is that the only ones actually being released into the general public were ones that were close to being done with their, like they had finished their visa process. So I believe the others are being held like in kind of refugee camps affiliated with US military bases. That is not to say that there won't be people that are like given not enough background checking before they get let out. I have no idea like exactly what their process is going to be for the non-special immigrant visa holders, if it's just like a random Afghan with no documents who claims they're in danger and pays the money to get on a flight. I don't know, exactly what they're going to do, but I'm more concerned about the people that didn't get on flights who should have than the like random people who got on flights are going to be turned loose with no vetting, because I know they're not just being dumped in the middle of New York and said, oh, welcome to America. Like they're being brought to a base for further processing. So there is going to be more security screening before they're just like turned loose into the general public. So that is one rumor that could be cleared up.
Right. So given the administration's response, I guess Biden's like personal behavior of like not taking questions and like and going on vacation and then canceling and seemingly not fully being like involved with this. Is this dereliction of duty on the part of the administration? And if so, is it impeachable?
I would say it is. I guess it sort of depends on how, like whether or not it's impeachable, I guess depends on how, liberal your definition of impeachment is. I mean, I think one of the things is like giving, aid and abetment to the enemy. So, I mean, it seems like, well, at least there's fairly persistent rumors that they're like paying the Taliban under the table to behave themselves a little bit better. And, in that case, like if you're actually just straight up paying off terrorist groups, like that would seem like it would fall under aiding and abetting the enemy. So I mean, yeah, I would.
That would be treason.
Yeah, so I mean, I would not be surprised. So like, not the State Department has, and the Biden administration has done a pretty good job of keeping everything under wraps. They are denying that there was any quid pro quo with the Taliban. I'm sure Republicans would be, given all the quid pro quo talk and the
No,
Trump's impeachment.
Yeah, apparently, like when Jen Psaki was like asked, is the administration like paying the Taliban to stop? She didn't say no. She said it's not like a quid pro quo. That's not a no.
Yeah, that is true. I think this has been badly mishandled. I think that there is potentially stuff that has been done that is, I was very opposed to President Trump was originally impeached because of apparently trying to strong arm Ukraine into getting intelligence on Joe Biden. And I mean, I would not be surprised. And if you believed that that was an impeachable offense, I will not at all be surprised if the Biden administration did stuff that was like arguably worse in terms of doing like quid pro quos with the Taliban. I would not expect. I know a lot of Democrats are upset with the administration. I would not expect to see Democrats like trying to impeach their own guy. I do think, especially given the long history of the opposing party doing well in midterms, especially when the administration is not very popular, it's quite likely Republicans will take back the House. And then I would expect to have a lot of hearings on Afghanistan, because I mean the Democrats have given a huge political gift to Republicans here, like surrendering to terrorists and bribing terrorists and leaving behind citizens, and there's just going to be like endless material for Republicans. And I mean, I would not be surprised if I would be surprised if President Biden were removed from office over this, but I would not be surprised if Republicans impeached him. And after President Trump being impeached over the Ukraine stuff, I mean, there may be stuff that's just as bad here that would be the basis for that.
Do you have anything else you want to say on this whole situation that has been, as they say, cobbled together?
I think it's really hard to know it's so hard to know what the actual situation on the ground is in Afghanistan. Like, we have a lot of sources, but the Taliban is also like pressuring, like there's a Taliban resistance in Panjshir Valley, and they're also like trying to shut down telecommunications there. So that's another concern, is that the Taliban is going to start just like shutting down the networks in Afghanistan.
And has the Taliban been keeping to their word about what they would do, like treating women? Say they'll have their rights within the limits of Islam, and apparently they're now being married off to soldiers, and they're not being allowed to go to school. I don't know if that's true, but I feel like that's coming.
Yeah, I do not think the Taliban is. I think they are trying to improve their public image a little bit. So I think for the first few months they're going to be on better behavior, probably. In part because they're trying to like convince the world that they're nicer than they really are, to like get some of their money back that's been frozen and stuff like that. So I think, well, like I have seen that they shot some woman in Kabul for like wearing Western clothes and stuff like that. So it's not. I mean, I guess they're gonna say, oh well, in Sharia law, you're not supposed to.
And apparently they're banning music.
Yeah, so they're like beating people for like having music, but right now, at least in Kabul, they're more sticking with beating people than actually executing people. But I mean, in areas that are further away from cities and where they're being watched less closely, they could start killing people as well. So
yeah, and apparently they've been rounding up interpreters as well. Like, yeah.
Yeah, it's hard to get in. I am sure that some have been killed, and there's a lot of rumors of like house searches and catching people, but just because they search the houses doesn't necessarily mean that they I mean, I know of interpreters that have had encounters with the Taliban that they've lived to tell about, just because they've been able to hide their identity. So it's not, so like the situation is very dire for interpreters. They are like, all the ones I know are like moving around and are terrified of being caught by the Taliban. I do not have a good estimate of like how many have been killed and how many are still there. we do presume that most of them are still alive, just because it's going to take a while for the Taliban to like hunt them all down. But I'm sure that some have been captured and killed. But we don't really have good information on that right now. And I think one thing that is pretty clear is that the Taliban is trying to not really like, they're not just like openly shooting people, and they're not just having like public executions right now because they're trying to maintain their good image. There is some, and I have seen at one point, like a few days ago, interpreters started circulating this photograph of like the Taliban killing people, and it was an old photograph, and they said, oh, this happened just like a day ago in this province. And like I had been sent this picture 2 years ago, and it was apparently of them like murdering Hazara people in some province. And so it was Taliban killing people, but it wasn't recent. And I'm sure that it is happening, but it's really hard to know like exactly how much has happened. But I know that there's like tens of thousands of interpreters and their families like living in terror, not knowing when the Taliban is going to catch up with them and kill them. And I know of people that have disappeared due to the Taliban. So it's definitely happening, just probably not as much as it will be soon if these people can't get out.
Well, let's talk about that, because if the Taliban succeeds in killing a significant number of people who help the United States, has the United States lost the ability to operate in a country that doesn't speak English for a generation? Have we lost the, like, because are people not going to trust us anymore?
I mean, I think that's a huge concern of mine and of everybody in the community that's advocate. I mean, I think like for me and for others, probably our number one motivation is the humanitarian concern and the moral concern. But yeah, the national security concern is huge, because like if you know that anytime the president decides it's not politically expedient to maintain a military presence in this country, he's just going to up and leave you to get murdered, then you're not going to be very excited about working with the U.S. There are there's a significant Afghan American population, so I mean some of those might come from this side, and there was a little bit of that before, but if the U.S. were to go back into Afghanistan, you could have more of that, like Afghans that are already here that then enlist in the military. And I've even had interpreters that are still there that are like, if I get to the U.S., I want to enlist in the U.S. military. So I don't think the U.S. would have like no ability to find interpreters, but I think it is a huge moral disgrace that we're treating our allies this way, and it is going to have huge national security implications in terms of being able to find interpreters in the future. And it's a heartbreaking situation on so many levels. It's a catastrophe, morally, humanitarian wise, national security wise. It's just a catastrophe on so many levels.
Well, Kristy,
and
I was just saying the two of us, like, we hate to sound like a broken record to those of us who are watching, but we're going to keep talking about this, and as long as things keep changing, we're going to keep covering this, because as the title of this show implies, this situation really was cobbled together, and we're really seeing the consequences of that. So, Kristy, thank you so much for joining me. You and I are going to keep on this, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're going to keep following what's going on. And yeah, I think if you are, if you're in contact with, like, if you're listening to this, like, contact your elected representatives. Like, there is still more that can be done. Even, I even talked to someone today who is from Tajikistan, and he was like, well, why isn't the U.S. like pursuing an agreement with the Tajik government that if someone is able to get to the border and presents documents that they work from the U.S., they will be allowed to come to Tajikistan. And it's like, these are things that would really not, and it's possible something like that's being done, but there's none that I'm aware of. And like, why aren't Western governments at least taking the responsibility to try to open pathways to safety for the people we left behind? And there's just so little regard for them and for human lives that they don't have an American or Canadian passport or whatever. It's like, well, gee, sorry, that's too bad. These things happen, it's part of war. And it's just it's not okay to have these flippant attitudes. But as members of democracies, like, part of it's on us. Contact your elected representatives and tell them this is not acceptable. We need to be doing more to help these people.
And if you live in a country like, say, Canada, ask your candidates running for office where they stand on this, and vote accordingly.
Yeah. Yeah, and we've seen there are people in America, there are people in both parties that are really good about this issue and people in both parties that are really bad. And so, yeah, it's not just a like, oh, vote for Democrats or vote for Republicans if you care about US military interpreters. It takes a little bit more nuance to figure out like where they stand and what their record is, but it's something we have to understand to be able to put pressure on our governments to do better. We have to know who's doing well and who's doing badly and be willing to call them out. And I talked to so many veterans that are so passionate about this, like from all across the political spectrum, and that's their comment as well, is that if we're unable to like hold our governments accountable, that's how this kind of thing happens. People need to wake up and stop being partisan hacks and start expecting more from our government.
And on that note, Kristy, thank you so much for joining me tonight. I will see you next week.
Yes. Thanks for having me.